What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Friar Tuck from Breaking the Habit, and he is going to be defending God against the claim that God causes or is responsible for cancer. Now, from a naturalistic perspective, we can understand why cancer happens in all living organisms on this earth, but from a more God-centered perspective, it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless God loves to see his created organisms writhe in agony and die pointless deaths, kind of making him look like a dick. But Friar Tuck today is going to be telling us why God's not responsible for it and why we're actually responsible for all of the horrible shit, including cancer, that happens to us. So if you want to fuck around and find out why you cause cancer just existing, then please stay tuned.
One of the most common criticisms I hear directed at God is the existence of cancer. If God were all-powerful and all-loving, then why do children get cancer and die? For many, it feels like a checkmate on God, a trump card to any argument of his love and mercy. How do you look at a suffering child, a family ripped apart by some deadly disease, something that more and more of us are experiencing these days, and continue to trust in God?
It's not really about trusting in God, for me at least. It's more about, hey, does this God even exist? And this is primarily because if I were an all-powerful and all good type of God, and I saw some organism that I created suffering, and I could, in an instant, with a snap of my fingers, stop that suffering from happening, then I would. This ends up making me turn out to be more moral and more empathetic than the God of the Bible. Because the way that I see it is that if God has the power to stop it, and he is all good, like he's omnibenevolent, and he's loving, and he has this loving relationship with his creations, then you would think that that particular kind of deity would want to prevent that kind of needless suffering. Of course, like I alluded to before, on a naturalistic perspective, we understand why cancer happens and why all this needless suffering happens, because shit just happens. Like nature just operates, and part of nature is suffering, and it's only suffering from one particular perspective. And considering that nature isn't sentient or anything like that, it doesn't have a perspective on what is or isn't suffering. So it literally can't care. But like I said, and like I pointed out in this little section here, on a God-centered perspective where God is all-powerful and omnibenevolent, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense for cancer to exist in the first place.
And it bothers me, like legitimately upsets me. It's not the sort of thing I can bring up when counseling someone in the midst of their grief, I understand, but I think that it is one of the most ridiculous, illogical, short-sighted things we can say.
Is it though? God's all-powerful. God is also omnibenevolent, and he has this loving relationship with us. Why would he then sit back in his lazy boy eating Cheetos while somebody suffers from cancer? I feel like this particular equation is quite simple. If God actually does love us, and he has this loving relationship, and he's omnibenevolent, and he's all-powerful, meaning that he's basically like a Thanos with the reality stone, and he can just change reality to meet whatever he wants it to be, then it would kind of seem to indicate that God in some way, for some reason, wants that suffering to happen. I don't know why that God would want that suffering to happen. I know if I was omnibenevolent, I had a loving relationship with somebody, I wouldn't want them to suffer. I would want to do everything that I could in order to alleviate whatever pain or suffering could happen. If I could snap my fingers and cause diabetes to just disappear from the world, I know that would also help me, but it would also help plenty of other people and help them in their suffering. It would prevent a lot of suffering. I mean, if I could do that with a snap of my fingers like I was fucking Thanos, I would. God apparently has this power and chooses not to use it. And I would think that anybody out there would have a similar opinion about suffering. If they could prevent someone's suffering or alleviate someone's suffering, they would. And that's what it means to be a good and loving person, to not be omnibenevolent, but just be benevolent in general.
If we want someone to blame for cancer, I think it's time we took a long look in the mirror of society.
Yeah, I stopped it really quick here because, he's like, take a long look at society. And from a naturalistic perspective, I do agree that there are things in this world that, we do to ourselves that end up giving us cancer. There are certain diets out there that can, make cancer, I guess, easier to develop and all this other stuff. Like, there are things in this world that can be done, but this is all from a very naturalistic perspective. From this magical God perspective, where he can Thanos snap cancer out of existence, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So structuring your entire argument on, there's a lot of things that we do to ourselves that cause cancer, doesn't really address the issue here. The core of the issue is God can do something and he chooses not to, which makes him a prick if he were to exist. I don't think that he does. I am persuaded by the naturalistic argument that, there is no God to control all of this stuff. So nature just kind of operates in the way that it does. And part of that nature is that cancer happens because of how flawed organisms are and how flawed, genetics is, and all of those particular excuses or reasons for cancer to develop. Those are all reasonable answers to give here on a naturalistic perspective. So that's why I'm swayed by it.
According to a 2008 study by Pharmaceutical Research, the two leading causes of cancer-related deaths, making up between 55 and 65% of all deaths, is tobacco and poor diet.
Okay. So I know I stopped really quick again. So I get it that those things are carcinogens, or they can be cancerous and all this other stuff. But under the idea, the Christian theology, and I feel like this would also be included in Catholic theology of God knitting us in his womb, or God having a plan, or God having individual plans for each and every person. That means that God had the individual plan for that person to eat shitty and get cancer, or the individual plan for that person to end up smoking and get cancer, or that person to not smoke and have somebody else outside of themselves that give them cancer through secondhand smoke. That would be a violation of free will. Let's just fucking forget about that, because we're not even going to deal with, God possibly defying free will. Let's just allow other people to defy other people's free will, and the fact that they chose not to smoke, but they still got lung cancer because of secondhand smoke or other particular carcinogens that exist in nature in general. Let's not even worry about all that kind of bullshit. Let's focus on how God supposedly knits us in the womb and has a plan for us, and if that is the case, he is still a fucking prick.
Namely, those with lots of fried foods, heavily processed foods, red meat, and alcohol. Think about that for a second. As rampant and awful as this disease is, more than half of all cancer-related deaths are the result of poor diet and exercise, things that are within our ability to control and entirely preventable. God is not to blame for our choice to smoke, drink, or eat unhealthy foods.
Is he though? I mean, again, I go back to this whole idea that God has a plan for our lives. God has a plan for everything, right? He's in control of reality. He knits us in our womb. He knows us before we're born, as far as the quote unquote good book says. Under this whole idea in Christianity, which I know that you have plenty of ways to get around it, Christians out there, this whole idea that God sort of prepares us and, creates a future for us and everything like that. He knows what's going to be happening to us. Even as we're a small child, for this particular argument that this guy is bringing up here, God would still be a prick in this situation because God set up that person to get cancer eventually. Of course, none of this is even touching on the fact that plenty of babies are born with cancer who didn't make a decision to eat poor diets and all this other stuff. Of course, this guy would probably blame the mother for, having a poor diet, or maybe he blames the father for some kind of generational, stupid, magical fucking curse or something like that. I don't fucking know. His whole idea here that, we make decisions that give us cancer. It's like, under a naturalistic perspective, sure. But under this whole magical God idea in the theology of the Bible, that doesn't make a lot of sense because of what it says in the fucking Bible. He has still yet to explain like genetic diseases that present at birth or that babies are born with and everything. Like, I don't know if he's going to cover any of that, but it seems like that would be a pertinent topic to discuss here, not just people making the free will decision to get cancer or to eat poorly money and get cancer or something like that. That's one particular path. What about the kids, and what about the people who don't make the free will decision to participate in those particular things, but they still get cancer? This is one of those particular paths he's talking about. And I haven't checked his numbers here. I'm going to assume that they are correct. I mean, it really doesn't matter for the argument, but even if so, he still needs to account for these other individuals who have had their free will violated. Why is it okay for one person to violate the free will of another person, but God somehow is special in that he can't violate people's free will and all this other shit with, preventing cancer in the world? Like, I'm kind of curious about this point. I don't think you'll actually answer my specific questions. I'm interested to see where he goes with this.
That's on us. And with that logic, then so are environmental factors that lead to cancer. While no one of us is responsible for the pollutants that cause us harm, it is the direct result of human choices as a society that are causing cancers today. I'm talking about motor vehicle exhaust, both diesel and gasoline, which pollutes the air with carbon monoxide, nitrogen and sulfur oxides, unburned hydrocarbons, and other toxic compounds. It is classified as a Class 1 carcinogen and is linked to both lung cancer and heart disease. Or what about forever chemicals, highly toxic substances that never break down in the environment and have been shown to cause cancer and other diseases, even in small amounts? They're used in Teflon, wrappers for fast food, stain-resistant furniture and carpets, clothing, and even personal care products, making it very easy for them to enter our water and food supply. Nearly every American, including newborn babies, have some amount of these chemicals in our blood.
So wait a second. I don't know if he's trying to make this particular argument, but are you trying to say that these forever chemicals are giving newborn babies cancer? Like babies that develop with cancer, they apparently got it from forever chemicals. I'm not saying that that's not the situation, but I feel like it is kind of a cop-out with your magical, God worldview perspective here, because God, this should be easily preventable by God. All of these things do not actually account for the actual issue in Christian theology, which is the reason why we bring up cancer in relation to God, and specifically in response to Christians when they start talking about, their faith and everything, or trying to force people into their faith, or trying to talk about how atheists should believe in God and all this other stuff. That's the reason why we bring that up, is because it's directly contradictory to your faith. That's what we want to know about, not the naturalistic causes for cancer and how all these carcinogens are around us all the time and how all of that. Like the naturalistic explanation, sure, that's reasonable. How does God factor into this? Why does God turn a blind eye to these kinds of things? Why does God allow his plan to be subverted? Or does he not have a plan in the first place? I would love to get answers to these questions, but sadly, all of the answers that I've ever gotten have just not been good, and I don't think that he is going to be answering me today.
Who hasn't seen those mesothelioma commercials over the years? Have you or a loved one been diagnosed with mesothelioma? Call our law office because we know the cause: asbestos. For years, we pumped this mineral into our insulation and floor tiles, having no idea they caused horrific harm on those who came in contact with it. I'll go on. Benzenes are used to synthesize chemicals and have been linked to leukemia. Vinyl chloride, plastic used in pipes, causes liver cancer. Formaldehyde used for embalming increases the risk for myeloid leukemia and rare cancers. Nitrates lead to bladder cancer, dioxane leads to lymphoma, and don't even get me started on pesticides. In 2022, Monsanto, the company that makes Roundup, paid out $11 billion in litigation for the horrific damage its product caused on the health of ordinary people. At what point are we going to get to the part where God is to blame here?
At what point? I'm sorry, we passed it all the way at the beginning of the fucking video. Like when we fucking started, like at the very beginning, that's where we started with blaming God because of the theology that's contained in your Bible. Whether it's Catholic or Protestant, it doesn't really matter because it's still there. The theology's there. I mean, how do you answer this theological problem with your faith? That's the entire thing. Like, we're not Christians over here trying to argue that, oh, well, God's responsible and that's why I hate him or something. Like, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that there's a contradiction between between reality and your theology. How do you reconcile that? So we have to start at the very beginning with questioning God's place in all of this.
While there is certainly room for wondering about God's intervention and protection, a valid question for sure, there has to come a point in our anger and frustration when we realize that not everything is up to God to prevent.
First of all, there's the insinuation that God wants to prevent it, right? Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he wants that kid to have cancer, right? Maybe he wants that person who didn't smoke all their lives to end up getting lung cancer, either due to secondhand smoke or other reasons in their life. Maybe they inhaled plaster, but only in California, because apparently that's the only state in which you can get cancer in that way. I don't know why. But I feel like God having a plan, if this disrupts his plan, if our will disrupts his plan, why can't he fix it? Why can't he stop it or something like that? He's done it plenty of times in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. God has appeared and done things, miraculous things. But for some reason, once we could actually catalog and analyze and critically examine God's supposed miracles, they all of a sudden have stopped happening, at least in a verifiable way. Of course, religious people will say, no, God still does miracles, but none of them have actually passed any kind of scientific tests or have been through any kind of scientific rigor and survived. It's so weird that happened, right? But in any case, it just seems really weird to me for him to say, oh, who says that God can even do this or can or want to do these things? I feel like this is contradictory to shit that he said or that the Bible says, like God being omnibenevolent. If God's omnibenevolent, then why wouldn't he want to prevent these things? If God has a loving relationship with us, why wouldn't he want to do these things? If you had a friend who was suffering from cancer and you had the magical cure for it, you could snap your fingers and your friend could be cured, but you stand there and you look at your friend and it's like, no, I don't know about this. I feel like maybe you need to suffer and die. Is that a loving relationship there? Are you being loving or benevolent towards your friend? I feel like it violates this whole concept that he's presenting in this video, violates this whole idea about God being benevolent, let alone omnibenevolent or even all powerful.
When we are the ones creating toxic chemicals and not worrying where they go, burning fossil fuels with reckless abandon, designing everything with single-use plastic that just ends up in the ground or our oceans, literally coating cookware and food storage with substances that will never break down.
Okay, God, being the orchestrator and creator of reality, created those chemicals to do those things. Those things have those effects on our reality because God set it up that way in your worldview. In my worldview, the naturalistic worldview, it's totally reasonable to be yeah, humans are shit. We've done bad things. And because of that, people are prone to get cancer due to our genetics work and how all of the mechanisms of organisms, operate. Cancer is just going to happen. That's understandable, but under this whole magical idea that God created everything, is the orchestrator of reality, why did he create these chemicals in order to make it to be cancerous to us? If we are his chosen organisms on this planet, why did he specifically have chemicals created or the ability to create these chemicals be there that would be cancerous to us? Can you imagine yourself setting up a terrarium, but putting a pool of acid in there, just waiting for some animal that you have to jump in thinking that it's water, or to drink it thinking it's water, but it's really this acid that's just going to kill them? Can you imagine doing that? Because that's what he's making God seem like here. It's I'm going to create reality now. I'm speaking for God, obviously. I'm going to create reality now, but also I'm going to create these chemicals that will be very detrimental to the health of my favored organisms. And I know specifically that they're going to use these chemicals later, and it's going to give them cancer and cause them to die. This seems like a good idea. Our point, secular secularists or methodological naturalists. Our point is that considering the theology of Christianity, it doesn't make a lot of sense for those things to exist to give us cancer, let alone cancer exists in the first place.
And in general, stripping the natural world of valuable resources and leaving it a wasteland, I don't know how we have the gall to blame God when a 5-year-old gets cancer.
Well, when a 5-year-old gets cancer, obviously they didn't make any kind of decisions in order to get cancer. Like they didn't, at least they didn't have the ability to make reasonable decisions on, what they're eating or anything like that. So obviously an outside agent is violating their free will and giving them cancer or setting them up to get cancer. Whether that's God or the parents, as far as the baby's concerned, from that perspective, it makes no difference. Somebody's violating their free will. Why does it seem to be okay to violate that baby's free will by giving them cancer when God could violate that baby's free will by snapping cancer away? I mean, obviously this guy would say, well, it's the parents' free will. They free will chose to wash their baby with chemicals. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what else you're supposed to wash off with. I mean, soap is a chemical. I mean, I feel like this entire apologetic can get pretty convoluted quick. The thing that I'm focusing on, though, is that there's no resolution for God being in a loving relationship with his organisms or the people that believe in him or whatever. And, his omnibenevolence and him choosing to not get rid of cancer. On a naturalistic perspective, what he's saying is making sense. I just want to heavily stress that. Like naturalistically, sure, this guy is making sense right here with what causes cancer. But if you have a God-centered worldview, then God being at the center of it and being the reason for everything and being omnibenevolent and all loving and all being in a loving relationship, he is to blame because you have put him in that position. It's not our fault. And I get that this guy is, angry at atheists pointing this out, but, and I've come to say this a lot, excuse our literacy on this, but we just read the fucking Bible and we can interpret what the theology is, and we say, this shit don't make sense, bruh.
God did not cause that kid to get cancer. We did, when we approach the world around us, as Pope Francis says, as an object of exploitation, unbridled use, and unlimited ambition. Actions have consequences. While it may not be possible to trace a direct or singular cause for each person's cancer, we know for sure that decisions we're making as a people, reckless behaviors from corporations and governments alike, directly lead to more sickness and death.
Well, I mean, we can definitely draw a direct line from anything that happens in reality to God. And you know how we connect those things? It's through the Bible, because the Bible directly says that God is responsible for reality. God is responsible for all of those things that give us cancer, thus making God responsible for cancer. Like God's setting up the universe in order for those things to even happen. Like any way that you come about it ultimately leads back to God, but that's a symptom of your worldview because you put God at the very center of it. You put God at the apex of it. You have God in a loving relationship with everybody. That right there kind of blows my fucking mind that you can say, oh, well, it's really humans that are putting themselves in this position, when really, if a human saw another human that was suffering and had a loving relationship with them, that human would prevent that suffering in one way or another. I don't understand what he thinks a loving relationship is. I mean, obviously he's, very Catholic, so I kind of feel like maybe he's got a fucked up idea of what a loving relationship is in the first place.
8 years ago, Pope Francis tried to awaken us to the immense power we have to cause harm in this world in his encyclical Laudato Si. And earlier this month, he was back to remind us of what little progress we've made. We continue to live as if we are autonomous, omnipotent, and limitless, thinking little of the consequences of our actions, of the 5-year-olds that will suffer because of them.
And I feel like right here what he's saying is basically Catholic doctrine has changed over time, and now we admit that, humans can manipulate our reality and change it away from what God wanted. Of course, I still am very confused. Maybe it's because I was, I was brought up Catholic, but I didn't really understand the theology at the time, or at least I wasn't at an age where I could really understand the theology. And then later on, I became, Protestant, in that, I was Baptist, non-denominational, and all this other stuff. And so I've got these different ideas in my mind about what Christian theology is, but it seems like Catholics are, as far as the Pope goes, freely able to change the theology and the doctrines and all that, which is perfectly fine. And I'm glad, don't get me wrong, I'm glad that the Catholic Church recognizes climate change and inequality in the world and all this other stuff. But, I feel like maybe they need to focus on their whole child pedophile thing a little bit more than, what some of the other things that they're focusing on. But in reality, though, when you look at the Bible and then you look at the theology, they still are contradictory. It doesn't matter how much you change your particular theology or how much the Pope changes the Catholic Church's theology. We're still all working off of the Bible, and the Bible is contradictory to reality.
There is no doubt in my mind that God is all-powerful, all-loving, and ultimately in control.
Wait, how can you say that, but then at the same time say, but we're fucking shit up? Like, God's in control, but we're the kids in the back seat that are distracting daddy from the road, and now daddy's gonna fucking careen off of the road because we're in the back seat creating benzene and washing babies with soap and shit, or, breathing in plastic in California. Like, that's what's happening. That's what he's saying. Like, God's in control, but we're the shitheads in the back seat that are distracting daddy. I feel like that's what he's saying here. How can God be in control and simultaneously not be in control of shit? This is literally contradictory. Yeah, that's right, honey. It is a good fucking question for Friar Tuck here.
In the end, all will be made right, and those faithful to him will be brought into the peace of his kingdom. But until then, he has blessed us with free will. He has allowed us to be partakers in his creative process, giving us tremendous power to affect the world around us.
If we can affect the world around us, then God is not in control of shit. If God doesn't want to affect our free will and we can affect the world around us, then God is still not in control of shit. But still, this does not go anywhere to touch the whole, God's in a loving relationship with everybody. He loves us so much, but he'll also stand by and watch us suffer and die. And I guess that's because, he chose to do that. But still, if I was in if I had a loving relationship with somebody and I saw them suffering, I would not hesitate to stop that suffering. I wouldn't hesitate. God, though, is like, I'm just going to see how this plays out. I want to see you wiggle and squirm in pain, bitch, is kind of what I see God up there doing in his lazy boy.
As long as we continue to act as we have, forgetting that the world we have is shared by all and that the choices we make come back to affect us, we have no one to blame for our sickness but ourselves.
Well, I mean, on a naturalistic perspective, again, just to wrap this up, I agree. We have ourselves to blame, right? Nature, rather. We have nature to blame, and then partially ourselves because of the chemicals that we've synthetically created and all this other stuff. But on a God-centered perspective, we have God to blame ultimately. Like, however you want to draw this particular map of causality for the Christian worldview in general, and Catholic worldview included, it all leads back to God. God is the one that is supposedly in control. God is the one with the loving relationship with us. God is the one that's supposedly omnibenevolent, and God is the one that's supposedly all-powerful. And I don't understand any of that fucking shit when considering reality. I don't know how all of that meshes with reality, what we experience in reality. It's contradictory. It does not comport with reality. So maybe you should find a new fucking worldview. That's going to be it for his video today. I hope that you guys appreciated this look into some Catholic apologetics about the problem of suffering, specifically cancer and God's role in it. If you will, please go down below. Let me know what you thought about Casey's argument here. Do you think that he actually supported God not being responsible? Or do you think that maybe he needs to work on his argument a little bit, or, think about his worldview a little bit more? Let me know down below in the comments. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.